Hi everybody, I'm Patrick from GoldBio, and today we're going to go over how to pack an Agarose affinity resin into a purification column. While pre-packed affinity resins are available, it's often more cost-effective to buy a larger volume of resin in bulk and pack your own columns at the bench. There are a variety of empty columns available, so you can always find one to suit your specific needs. The first step is to bring your resin and buffer to room temperature, then degas. Degassing the buffers and resin now will reduce the number of air bubbles that may form in the column during pouring. I typically degas for around 30 minutes, but you may need more or less time depending on your specific conditions. For our purposes, these buffers and resin have already been degassed. The next step is to equilibrate your empty column with buffer. Place the bottom cap or tubing onto the bottom of your column. Next, you'll add the buffer to the column until it's almost full. For this column, it's around 10 milliliters. Make sure to pour your buffer into the column slowly as to not introduce any additional air bubbles. Next, you'll run a few milliliters of buffer through the bottom of the column to dislodge any air bubbles that might have formed underneath the frit. Once this is finished, check the tip again for air bubbles. If there are still some trapped down there, you can place your column into a centrifuge tube and spin it briefly to dislodge any stragglers. It's important that there aren't any air bubbles present at the frit, so if there are some that refuse to go, you'll have to empty the column and add new buffer. Once all the air bubbles are removed, it's time to add your Agarose resin to the column. Place your funnel into the head of the column. Swirl your beads gently to make sure that everything is in suspension. Now, working very quickly, open the bottom stopper and allow a little bit of buffer to flow through the column. Next, pour the resin slurry down the side of the column. Pour your beads until your desired column height is reached. Most commercial resin slurries are 50%, so it's 1 milliliter of Agarose in 2 milliliters total volume, but check your specific Agarose resin and adjust accordingly. Although it is possible, we don't recommend pipetting the resin into the column as it can jam up the pipette tip and you can have a lot of lost product. Continue draining the buffer until the level is just above the settled resin. Watch this very carefully as it's very important to make sure the resin doesn't dry out. If the resin does go dry, you'll have to start all over again. If the resin does go dry, you'll have to start all over again. Alternatively, you can allow your resin to settle by gravity, but this can take around half an hour to fully settle and could produce an unevenly packed column. Next, you'll want to rinse your resin with 5 to 10 column volumes of buffer or De-ionized water to remove any trace of preservatives that may be left. De-ionized water is a good choice because it removes the preservatives and is much more economical. Again, pouring the buffer down the sides of the column slowly as to not add air bubbles. Drain the buffer off slowly and stop before the resin is exposed to any air. If you're using the column immediately, equilibrate the column by adding another 5 to 10 column volumes of buffer. If you're storing the column, add a little less than 1 full column volume of buffer or De-ionized water. Replace your bottom cap and top cap, then store upright at 4 degrees C until needed. Again, you can place your capped column into a centrifuge tube and place this tube into a rack in the fridge to make sure it stays vertical. The columns will last for around 4 weeks at 4 degrees C and are usable as long as there isn't any visible growth in the buffer or De-ionized water. To increase shelf life, you can add a little bit of sodium azide to a final concentration of 0.02% to inhibit microbial growth. For the most consistent results, though, we recommend only packing columns that will be used within a 1-week time span. And that's all there is to it. And in the time it takes you to purchase a pre-packed column, you can pack your own for a fraction of the cost. If you have any questions, you can email me at techsupport@goldbio.com.